Okay. Hi, everyone. Just some quick preamble first. Welcome to the Kubeflow Pipelines community meeting. Today's date is November 19th, 2025. The meeting is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct. The meeting is recorded and it will be uploaded to the Kubeflow YouTube account after the call has ended. So, first order of business, are there any new attendees on the call who would like to introduce themselves?
Hi, folks. My name is Anya. I'm a software engineer working at Red Hat. I work on OpenShift AI. I also work on Kubeflow SDK and happen to be a Kubeflow SDK maintainer. And since we have some integration going on with Kubeflow pipelines, I decided to come and see what's everything all about. Thanks.
Welcome, Anya. Anyone else? Tolga, have you introduced yourself yet?
I joinned once, like when Umair was leading. So this is my officially second, but I can also introduce. Hey fellas, this is Toga. So I have a pleasure working with Mike Zazula and the Alex here at Capital One. So like my team is, and I also have a couple of other pipeline members in my team. So I'm trying to be the gatekeeper and then make sure that everything is going smooth within the team, and then trying to help Kubeflow community as well.
Thanks, Tolga.
Who knows? Maybe I can do like a PR sometime.
Oh yeah, Uh, you have to, now that you've introduced yourself.
Great. All right. So the agenda was a little light because when I looked at it this morning, there was nothing on it. So I added a couple of things. And I want to start off by, and this is a little bit out of order, but I want to start off by just mentioning this survey. Anya, do you want to provide some context on it? No pressure.
Yep, sure. So we created the Kubeflow SDK survey. And we encourage people to participate in it. You don't have to be a Kubeflow SDK user or use Kubeflow at all. We just gather some thoughts from data scientists on what are their challenges in building AI workloads in Kubernetes. So we would appreciate any feedback, or if you happen to know any data scientist teams, please share that with them. It will help us shape the future of Kubeflow SDK.
Thanks, Sonia. Okay, moving on. There is going to be a release this week, hopefully. And I just want to call attention to it in case anybody has like last minute concerns or reservations or things you'd like to get squeezed in. There's a small window, a very small window, if you want to include additional PRs in the release. Before I move on from that, anybody have any thoughts or input?
Yeah, last week we had said we would do it last week, but now it's this week. So if there's any confusion, yeah, it's this week now. I'll try to cut it probably. So I know we had some PRs that we wanted to get in. The security fix for the artifact reading, that should be merged soon. I just approved it. Um, I don't I don't think I'm aware of any other PRs. I know, Alex, you were talking about one yesterday. I didn't have a chance to look into it. This was about the Seaweed FS, something about reverting a change regarding admin passwords being dropped.
Yes, I merged that PR this morning.
This has been reverted.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, is there what was the PR trying to fix? Is it concerning that we'd be releasing without this change, or
I don't think so. Uh,
okay?
yeah, I don't think so. I was upgrading Seaweed and it was also introducing some other things, but none of them were like, I think, requirements. So let me just pull in that. Let me pull up the actual PR. Yeah, so it updated Seaweed and in particular, it made some changes here to how, and it's a relatively small PR as well. But the issue was due to this right here. Let's see. I didn't dig deep. I kind of took their word for it because they're kind of driving on the seaweed front. Um,
Yeah, Julius has approval on the C feed since he drove that initiative, although we should probably have somebody from the maintainer uh, taking over is my current thinking since now it's part of core project. Um, but it looks fine to me. Um, yeah, they had gotten rid of the post start, which is how like the admin user was being created. Okay, cool.
Yes. So the issue was after a restart that the credentials would be gone, and
Okay,
that revert was necessary.
sounds good. Um, are there any other blockers that you're aware of?
For the release?
Hmm.
Nope, not that I'm aware of.
Vani, are you on the call? I know you had a PR, I think Matt was talking about, uh, or maybe it was somebody else.
Sorry, Humer, could you repeat?
Was wasn't there a PR that you had open for KFB or no?
Yeah, download to workspace
Okay,
support for importer.
mhm.
It's very close. Yeah, I think it just needs one more review from me.
Okay, let's wait on that then. I can cut a release on Friday. Sounds
Sounds
good.
things matter.
Nothing ever went wrong cutting a release on a Friday.
Okay, so I just wanted to call attention to this incredibly ambitious and impressive PR that deprecates MLMD and migrates all of that over to the KFP server APIs. Basically, I think the more eyes on this, the better. If anybody has bandwidth or interest or thinks that you may be impacted by this, which pretty much should include anybody using KFP, feel free to drop a comment or review. I just wanted to call attention to that. And also, this is like a very exciting PR that centralizes the driver. And it was submitted, almost 2 months ago. But if anybody doesn't like the fact that there is a driver per component in the DAG, and likes the idea of having a single driver for a workflow, the more people who validate this, I think the better. It's just a POC right now, but just seeing it deployed and validated across more than one use case, I think is going to improve confidence in the deliverable. And then obviously provide feedback as necessary if you run into issues or have concerns about some of the implementation details. I just want to highlight that as well. And that brings us to the end of the agenda. Like I said, it's very light agenda. Does anybody have anything that they want to bring up? The floor is open because we have plenty of time.
I could shoot. I know we kind of spoke offline or off of the pipelines meeting, about like what is like local mode for KFP, and if we wanted to kind of serve the UI locally. And I recall that I think there's uh, a PR from Francisco about having like the UI like rendered locally, like with just from the SDK. I don't know if that's something we would want to revisit or not, but yeah, just from the conversations that we were having yesterday, it made me think about it. And not sure
Yeah,
if anyone had thoughts.
I mean, I'm a strong proponent of it. I don't think it's a very controversial decision. I think we'll definitely want to do it. Um, but the only uh disagreements we may have is on like implementation, but I don't think there's any like strong objections on that front either. I think it's just like just pr weighing pros and cons of either approach and having the bandwidth to pursue it. Um, I think these are the blockers essentially. So like uh I don't know. Matt, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Sorry, be right back.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's something that at least like from our side, like my internal team, this is like up there in our priorities, but we just have things that are higher than that right now. But it is like local UI experience is something that we want to improve, and we want to have a UI around it. So we want users to be able to create pipelines, upload pipelines via UI locally, and the overhead needs to be very like small. Right now, you have to spin up the entire kind cluster. Like we hate that. The footprint on that is massive. We want users to be able to just spin up a server and on like their local system and run their pipelines. And maybe those pipelines then do a container Docker runner or something like that when they actually execute the user code. Or we do both subprocess and Docker runner, whatever. But that's like details.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. It's something that internally we want to do, like Amir was saying. Like if you have ever used MLflow, you can just pip install MLflow, run a single command, and you have like the UI running locally with the backend, like everything stored locally. And it's just like a really great experience to get started. So I would use that as a model where if I could pip install KFP maybe with extras and I could just run it, and then it's just using subprocess runner or Docker runner under the hood. I think that would be a really great user experience improvement.
So I think that there is a track that we're on where we are reducing the overhead to deploy KFP as a whole. We want to get rid so we're going to get rid of MLMD that comes with Envoy. We want to uh, uh, probably combine schedule workflow controller with the server itself. And as we reduce these kind of like these dependencies, it becomes more easier in the future to just run the server by itself and not have to depend on anything as well. Central driver might also make this easier if we decided to use the driver.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess is this on the roadmap for Capital One?
It is, yeah.
Oh,
So we would,
really?
yeah. I mean, we don't want to develop it independently without, yeah, if you guys are doing the same thing. So there's definitely room for collaboration here and like resource allocation so that can kind of distribute the
Yeah,
designs and implementation.
yeah. If Capital One wants to submit a KEP for it, we'd be happy to review it and might be able to allocate some resources to help with it too in the implementation.
Cool. I know, Michael, this is on your org's roadmap, right?
Yeah, it was something that they definitely want to have, and then, priorities shift, and it's still a want, but they're all like, you could do other stuff first. So
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I would definitely want to be involved in this work stream as well. Cool. Elish, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I like the idea of local as well. Just wanted to get an idea about, do we have like ways where we want to head towards how to serve UI locally? Because I can see two directions, and both directions may work, and maybe we want both directions as well. But just wanted to see if there are any ideas that people already have before I suggest anything.
I get the impression it's pretty open-ended right now. If you have ideas, like, we're open to hearing them.
Yeah, I was so one of the thing that I have worked with in my past is um, having some mock data, because UI, like static content is static content, right? UI can load the static content, but for content that it needs to retrieve from API, it could be mocked, which helps with pretty fast load up of the UI. It makes it flexible, so because you can change the data it could be like the data can be either generated dynamically on the fly as a mock data, or it could be some golden files that you have. And then depending on what you are trying to load on the UI, you can change your data and verify things that way as well. It makes it very flexible enough to load a UI page, and testing becomes very easy as well because then you have the flexibility to load the UI page with the data that you want it to be. And secondly, it could be like running API server locally and then UI making calls to the API server, but then you have the data coming from API server.
Gotcha. Yeah, that all sounds reasonable. I think like we don't have a design doc right now or a KEP, so we could start there. That'll be the first step. And then we could all kind of dogpile on that and provide feedback and like work towards a proposed implementation together. But those sound like good ideas. Another thing we might want to do is look into how Prefect handles this because people really like Prefect, and just could be a good reference for our own design. Okay, anything else on this specific topic? Okay, moving on. So Matt, you linked this PR. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah,
This yesterday. Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to bring this up just to make sure we're all aligned before we do merge this. So, for context, it was requested that alongside the KFP SDK, where it's automatically installed in the user's container, you would also have the Kubeflow SDK to make integrations with the rest of the Kubeflow platform easier. And it would potentially pave the way of having KFP nested under the Kubeflow SDK. This would be kind of a stepping stone towards that potentially. So the flow right now that's in the proposal is essentially detecting if the user is using the Kubeflow SDK and then adding it to the packages to install if it's not already present. There was some concern if you scroll down to Chen's response. Yeah, essentially there was a few debate points. One of them was, should we treat the Kubeflow SDK specially compared to other third-party libraries? And my thoughts were that we should, because we treat the KFP SDK especially, and Kubeflow SDK is an extension of that. But would be interested to hear other people's perspective. And then there was the dependency and version concerns. And I proposed that we pin the Kubeflow SDK version in our setup.py as a extras. And we would just use that for the version that we'd use. Pin at the major and minor, not at the patch. And yeah, I also thought if we explicitly disable KFP package installation in the component decorator, it assumes the user just wants to use what's available in the base image. So we would also not detect, like do the auto detection of the Kubeflow SDK usage. So essentially, if the user has KFP package installation on, we would default to automatically detecting if the Kubeflow SDK should be installed. And if it's off, then we respect like a new flag that determines if it's always install, auto, or off. Nilesh?
I'm just concerned about the same dependency version issue or conflict. I guess conflict isn't there because then we decide which one to use, right? But if the Kubeflow KFP SDK version is old and the pipelines are new, right, and the schema has changed, then we may start to see failures there. Like I don't know whether that's a concern for us or a concern for the user who specified the Kubeflow version.
So you wouldn't be using the Kubeflow SDK to interact with KFP at the moment. It's more just making it like the Kubeflow SDK be first class citizen in pipelines, so that if I want to submit a training job from a pipeline step, the SDK is preloaded with a version that we think is correct to use with this version of the KFP SDK. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, so my concern was around, let's just say, it is there. So this option is there, and then you have KFP version defined in that you have defined, right, in the setup.py file. But then Kubeflow is bringing an older version of KFP SDK. So that may not compile the pipeline because the schema has changed in the later versions of the KFP SDK.
Oh yeah. So for the time being, the KFP SDK won't be included in the Kubeflow SDK. That's like separate from this proposal, but yeah, I could see it being an issue when you if we were to do that.
Yeah, and then the other issue could come from when we are running the executor, right? It needs to download the KFP version, KFP SDK version. So I'm assuming we are not going to download the Kubeflow SDK during that, which may become a requirement later in the future because some of the pipelines may be created with Kubeflow SDK, and that Kubeflow SDK may be required at that time.
Yeah, this proposal is alongside installing the KFP SDK, you also install the Kubeflow SDK if it's used
in the executor.
pipeline. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then we may have conflict, like version conflicts then, right? When KFP SDK is included in Kubeflow SDK, and that is the plan, right? To start including Kubeflow SDKs in KFP SDKs in Kubeflow SDKs.
Yes. So I think, and I think in that case we'll just have to be aligned that it's like major and minor versions of KFP SDK and Kubeflow SDK are aligned. Well, not like the actual version number, but we pin to specific ones that work together.
Target state, we're going to be part of the Kubeflow SDK anyway, right? Eventually. At which point, a lot of these like kind of potential dependency conflicts will be sort of moot, because whatever we're doing right now to install KFP, we'll be doing that to install the Kubeflow SDK once we reach that target state.
But we have to consider migration. So like if I'm a user who is using KFP with KF SDK and I'm switching to like a KF SDK only with that includes KFP, then like migration, you have to consider that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are risks. Like there are risks with this. Like users will run into dependency conflicts.
Yeah. I don't think Extras enforces versioning. So like if you install the KF SDK manually and it's a different unsupported version, I think that could also be one.
Yeah. What's the cost of not doing this? Oh, Anya, I see you have your hand raised. I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
No, you can go ahead. I have another point to mention regarding extras.
I was just going to say, I think the cost of not merging something like this is that end users who want to leverage the Kubeflow SDK just have to pass it through packages to install. It's a pretty low cost, it's not like a terrible compromise in end user experience. And then eventually once like the KFP SDK is part of the Kubeflow SDK, then it'll all get installed automatically. But yeah, anyway, what were you going to say, Anya?
Yeah, another issue regarding migrating the SDK to the unified SDK is that there's no such a thing extra of extra. So for example, pipelines, you have some extras in your pipe project, but if we migrate it to the unified SDK, we might need to either get rid of something or consolidate and align with other SDKs as well. Or do something like Kubeflow and then extra like pipelines, transformers, or whatever you have as extra.
I think the extras are, what are they? Notebooks and Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, notebooks are probably going to be in the KF SDK, and Kubernetes doesn't seem controversial to add.
That's going to be consolidated anyway, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we could also namespace it with like, KFP dash whatever if we had to flatten it all. That's a good call out. No, should you want to say something?
I know that I just didn't lower my hand.
Oh, okay. I always do that. Okay. So
Is there action item or like a, I don't know. Did we start with a question or was it like a
Well,
PSA?
it's more like, should we do this? Because there was discomfort. So I personally, the original request, I was ambivalent about. I just didn't want to always install it. So I thought the compromise was detect if the user wants to use it and then install a version that works well with KFP. But the more I think about it, and like, there's very little to gain, in my opinion.
I think
So I'm
so.
actually
Yeah.
leaning against this feature.
Same after our discussion just now. I think there's like a lot of edge cases that we're talking about right now, and I think there'll probably be a lot that we haven't considered. I think Alex has a good point. It isn't that complicated to include it in package.installs.
Well, we could have a flag as a compromise that says install Kubeflow SDK, and we could provide a version that we think works well. The problem is that the SDK version is not necessarily aligned with the API server version that you're running the pipeline against, and presumably the API server version is what's aligned with the other parts of the Kubeflow platform because you deployed them together. So,
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Wait, could you repeat that part, please?
it's because the KFP SDK can be any version. Like, you can compile a pipeline with any version you install PyPy, but it might not be the same version as the KFP server itself. And usually the KFP server is deployed along with the other Kubeflow components through the manifest repo. And so those versions are aligned, but the SDK is not necessarily. So we can't really reliably pin a version of the Kubeflow SDK that we know will work with the other components, because it could be an old version, the user is using like a really new KFP SDK version, but still submitting a pipeline against an old installation of KFP and Kubeflow.
yeah, I'm leaning in the same direction as you guys, Matt and Humer. But the good news, Anya, is we will eventually be part of the Kubeflow SDK. And once we're part of the Kubeflow SDK, the Kubeflow SDK will get installed at runtime. So it's not like we're not saying this isn't ever happening. We're just saying maybe we should wait a little bit to avoid potential dependency hell and having to manage dependency hell, like opening the door, even if it's just a crack for
I
that kind of dependency conflict resolution.
I actually think we make it easier for users if we go from only KFP to a KF SDK that has KFP rather than KFP that had auto installing of KF's SDK to a KF SDK that includes KFP. You know what I mean? I think the former is a much simpler migration and you're going to encounter less headaches.
Yeah, this could be a hot take, but have we considered having our own default base image instead of the one from Docker Hub? It could just be based off of Docker Hub, and then that would be like have the KFP SDK pre-installed and the Kubeflow SDK pre-installed. So if the user's using that, it's just available, and then that's aligned with the
This
API server
sounds like a
version.
great idea. I think this is not a hot take at all. We use the Python base image. Wait, is it actually? Hmm.
So it's just a layer on top of the existing base image.
What's going to
Maybe we
happen
should.
with high stats, Matt?
I
People
know,
like
yeah.
people like lightweight images. Like they don't like anything on them. So, but we should, if we do this, give users the ability to easily overwrite the base image.
Which they already do, right?
I don't think they can. I don't think they can overwrite the base image, can they? They can at the add
Well,
component level, but we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about the default base image if you don't specify an image, right?
correct. But the SDK would just use our base image with a floating tag
Yeah.
of Python 3.9,
I
for
think like we
example, or
should,
3.11.
I think it's like low effort to allow users to overwrite that default uh if they want it to. Um if they just want like a Python 3.9, I don't know.
Yeah, I was more just saying like replace the SDK usage of the default to our own that's aligned with the same floating tag, but has maybe it's version by KFP version as well.
Yeah.
So you have like a Python 3.11 KFP 215.
Yeah. This is to include the KF SDK in this image, right? So that like
Correct.
yeah, okay.
So then they're pre-installed, and then the versions of the KFP SDK and Kubeflow SDK are aligned. Maybe we can exclude the KFP SDK because today the then the benefit of installing the KFP SDK that you use to compile the pipeline is that the SDK and executor have a new feature. Then you can take advantage of it without waiting for the API server to be updated. So maybe it's just a new base image with the Kubeflow SDK installed.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, sorry guys. I just joined. Are there any questions in terms of base installation or um, what the main concern?
Oh yeah, well, we're like pretty deep down a rabbit hole of um, about this PR, about automatically installing the Kubeflow SDK if
Yeah.
Kubeflow import is detected.
So, Homer, like, what are your main concerns in terms of detecting if the Kubeflow package is there and just installing it on top? Um,
Primarily
yeah.
dependency hell. Uh, so just like different versions resulting in conflicts and breaking things
Mhm.
um, and then like us having to kind of get our like users out of dependency hell instead of like kind of forcing them
I'm,
to do it.
yeah. I'm wondering what are the versions we really worry about because right now we don't have a bunch of dependencies, just Kubernetes. That's it. Like, do you have a lot of dependencies in KFP? I guess you do, right?
This is
Um,
largely related to the dependency deviations between KFP and KF SDKs,
mhm,
and as well as KFP server. So like your proper like the KFP proper when you deploy it and how it's provisioned by Kubeflow as a platform, misalignment between versioning there with the SDK that you're using for KFP with
mhm.
Kubeflow SDK. Um,
Yeah, maybe to put it another way, the KFP SDK isn't necessarily the same version as the API server because like you can pip install the latest KFP SDK. So I guess if we were to pin to a specific Kubeflow SDK version, it would have to come from the API server configuration.
there's also no way for us through extras. We might have to verify this, but I don't think we can enforce a version for users to use for Kubeflow SDK. We can specify the versioning in extras, and uh, we can use that to detect how to install it in like the user's runtime. but they might not necessarily be using that version when they're writing their pipelines. They could have installed the package manually, for example.
So when right now you install KFP SDK on the components, like who is enforcing the version? Is it API server? KFP API server?
No, it's just whatever the KFP SDK that was used to compile the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And that often
Um,
is ahead of whatever is deployed on the back end.
so you already have alignment overall, right?
The same major version though.
They're backwards
Yeah,
compatible. Like KFP is backwards compatible, the SDK. So we don't add changes that break backwards compatibility. So it's fine if you're just
Yeah,
using the KFP
so
version.
I think if this is the concern, and then let you have your hands up, but I think if this is a concern, we can also pin to the minor version, and we can align that the minor version would have any breaking changes, and then you'll like upgrade it mainly in the code if this is your main concern.
well, we were thinking of an alternative of like providing a default base image that is based off of the one from Docker Hub, but just have the Kubeflow SDK pre-installed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
Would
might be
that
tricky because then you won't have any latest bug fixes, right? On the patch version, for example.
Yeah, I mean, we would just pin to a floating tag, and then we would just keep that floating tag up to date.
Another thing too, Andre, is this is all like it's all temporary because eventually it will be part of the Qflow SDK. And as soon as that happens, like then we'll be installing
Yeah.
SDK at runtime. So it's just like an interim state until we reach target. Yeah. But yeah, we're the part I think part of the rationale is like the cost of not including this feature is relatively small. It just means that users that are using the Qflow SDK have to make sure to include it in packages to install. But the potential risks of including it are pretty high in terms of like dependency conflicts and having to manage dependencies on behalf of users.
But I'm trying to understand, so dependency conflicts is only for users who are using already Kubeflow SDK in their pipelines, right? Not for other users. Like we align on
Or
that.
or who have other dependencies that might conflict with the Qflow SDK.
Yeah,
Um,
but in any case, they need to solve this problem, right? Like they cannot run pipelines without solving the problem of dependency issues.
yes, yeah. If they want to use the Qflow SDK, they're going to have to install the
Yeah.
Qflow.
Yeah, because basically what we just do, we just automate this for them. I mean, installation part. They don't need to specify this in the packages to install. That's it, basically. But the
Yeah.
dependency issues will still be there for these users who try to run Kubeflow SDK within KFP components, right?
Yeah, I think the difference is they'll have to solve the dependency issues as opposed to us having to manage it for them and saying, "Hey, why isn't this working?" That's the concern. It's just the accountability that comes from managing the dependencies on their behalf. Yeah.
Okay. I also see, Nish, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I just want to raise another concern is that some people may have used some version of Kubeflow SDK from their past, and if we are installing it for them, which may or may not be compatible then with the pipelines, like the Kubeflow SDK version that someone has specified in their pipelines.
Yeah. Uh, that being said, like again, I just want to reiterate, like the other thing too is like it's kind of implicitly installing a dependency, and like eventually, like I said, target state is going to be that like that all of that will just be handled by when we migrate over to the Kubeflow SDK wholesale. You know,
Yeah, I mean that definitely will take time, right? Because we haven't really discussed the migration period, etc. And we I think like our first goal would be to just have a wrapper, right? As we discussed last time with Matt and Homer, right? A wrapper on top of the KFP client within the Qflow.pipelines package. So the idea of including this in the base image, like, can you explain a little bit? So basically, you're going to build these images to already include this as part of the components.
Yeah, that was
Basically.
just an idea because right now, if you define a component in your pipeline, and you don't specify a base image, it just uses the Python image from Docker Hub. We could just have another layer on top that has a Kubeflow SDK version that we know supported with the Kubeflow platform associated with that KFP version. Although that would still be problematic if the SDK is setting it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I have
mean,
some.
I kind of, yeah.
Yeah, just because again,
Yeah,
I don't want
please.
like the image management game is not fun. So they're
Yeah.
gonna, yeah, it's thankless. CVEs will surface, then we'll have to release new images. It's just, yeah, it's not like really the core of the less we have to do that, the better, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Is there like what is the cost of not doing this? Like where's the motivation coming from instead of waiting until like we can have the SDKs merged?
I think the cost is there, like we kind of provide, users will be still responsible to install it manually, and I mean resolve the problems by themselves, right?
But they still have to
Um,
install it when they're
I kind of,
I mean,
yeah, good.
like when they're writing their pipelines, the differences between you doing a pip install KFP and a pip install KF SDK versus a pip install KFP with your extras, right?
Mhm.
I don't see, and then they have to import it in their components, but they have to do that for their other dependencies anyways. It's probably not that much of a surprise. We can add a check saying that if you're importing packages, this is a problem for any package that you import, that if you didn't include in your package installs, then the pipeline won't work during runtime. That's a more general problem in KFP. We can validate that, but I don't think it's that much overhead for a user to just do an extra pip install.
I think
It's
it's mostly, I mean, yeah, I see this as a pros for us. I mean, because like, in any case, we need to resolve these dependency issues over time, right? I mean, if we find out them earlier, then, like hopefully the migration will be smoother, at least from my perspective. You can definitely disagree and, um, provide their other opinions. But again, we don't have a bunch of dependencies today on the Kubeflow SDK. It's only Kubernetes and Pydantic, as I, shared in chat.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
concerned about the dependencies. It's more the version of Kubeflow to select, like the Kubeflow SDK version to select. And we could partially solve this by pinning it at the API server as a configuration, as opposed to the Kubeflow SDK, but it's a much bigger change and not similar to how we do things today.
also not intuitive.
Yeah. Why we
Yeah.
don't want to pin this in KFP SDK as we discussed, like to the 0.2 version?
That's what I was saying, is that the KFP SDK that's installed in the user's component, like pipeline step, is the version they use to compile the pipeline, not one aligned with the API server. So you could end up with a much newer or much older Kubeflow SDK in that sense.
But the KFP also will be different then, right? Because
Yeah. But it's like
Yeah.
we maintain the backwards compatibility with knowing that in mind. Because like you could compile the pipeline and then not recompile it for a long time. So it's just using an ancient SDK, but then the API server will have been upgraded and then you're not using the correct, or then the Kubeflow SDK wouldn't be necessarily compatible with the version of like trainer installed, for example.
Yeah. But it's a similar problem with, even NB client that you install, right? For example.
Yeah, but what's used at runtime for the KFP SDK in the pipeline step is very minimal. It's basically just translating the user's Python function into like a JSON that
So you don't
the
expect a
code
lot of
can.
updates, right? And the backward compatibility issues, right, between the versions. So basically like any API upgrades there. So
Right. Yeah.
To concretize it, like, I think we might, up until recently, we were on 2.5 on the back end, but our users are using anywhere from 2.5 to 2.14.4 on the SDK. And all of that works and all of it's backwards compatible. And when we upgrade the back end with this next release internally, we'll still be using all these older versions of the SDK. There's like a matrix of compatibility.
Okay,
Mhm.
I think we should discuss
Yeah.
next like action items or what do we need because we're a bit over time.
Thanks a lot.
I think what I've learned from this is like let's pause for now, but maybe up the pressure to merge into the Kubeflow SDK. So if maybe someone can write a KEP about it.
Okay, can we get that as a comment on that thread?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, we can definitely make a comment there, and I guess, guys, like, the main point is like, what do you think in terms of, KF, from a pipeline's perspective, right? What should be the next steps from KFP perspective? Because I mean, I understand it's kind of like again, as we discussed with, today, this ambition goal that we want to unify everything, right, in a single Python package, but like eventually, these compatibility issues, I hope we can solve together, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Which means like what could be like our short step to at least work on these integrations, right? Um, without breaking a bunch of pipelines, right, of users. Um, yeah.
I mean, one thing that just popped in my head is a little out of the box. I know we're focusing on action items, but what if what if we update the SDK to surface a warning instead of like dynamically installing it? If you see that it's not pip installed, it raises a warning. If someone's doing import Kubeflow and Kubeflow is not in the list of packages to install. Although I guess if
Yeah,
it's image, yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I thought the same thing, but if it's the base image is overridden, then you can't give that warning.
Yeah.
So I think on the pipeline side, we would then have to be pip installing the SDK version aligned with the API server that's installed. I think that would be a behavior change we'd have to do to support this. And then I think we would be potentially unblocked to merge into the Kubeflow SDK.
I feel like should we be doing that regardless?
What if there are features? So, I mean, I guess hypothetically there could be features in newer versions of the SDK that you want to take advantage of, even if they're not.
If anything, if it
Yes.
was breaking, that's a signal that we introduced a backward breaking change that we shouldn't have.
That's true.
Yeah, I think it's fine to pin to the version from my perspective for now. And it's fine for users to say, hey, you cannot use this feature with KFP for now, right? Because we're still in this kind of exploratory phase. And I imagine like, the load of users who want to use this within KFP will be slower. Otherwise, more probably they maybe install this by themselves, right? And managing all those dependency issues by themselves. So we don't guarantee this will be backward compatible or you will get the newer versions in KFP, right? Which means like if you want, we can pin to the specific version as well.
Can we introduce this as like is there such a thing as like an alpha dependencies
So,
thing?
I mean, definitely, right? I mean, similar to API, in trainer, right? We don't guarantee the API compatibility unless we have the beta version, right? For our CRDs. So, um,
I'm I'm less okay if we can say that, hey, look, we will do a best effort install and we don't guarantee that compatibility. If there's version mismatches, whatever, we give the user the ability to install it themselves to resolve any sort of dependency issues, then I don't think I'm against it.
Well, like which version do you use? Like I said, you'd have to have it aligned with the KFP API server version.
Yeah.
Because like we guarantee a newer KFP installation will work, but it's like uh, a new KFP SDK installation will work, but we don't guarantee that for other Kubeflow components. And so it'll be kind of non-deterministic in a way, like the behavior that you get.
But the
Because like
KF SDK you install it's going to be in the IR, right?
yes, but if I recompile that pipeline with a different KFP SDK, I get a different Kubeflow SDK version.
But isn't that what you want? if you're running it against an older API server, it would still install the latest, the KF SDK that is now in the newly compiled pipeline. Isn't that the behavior you want?
No, because say I have say like I update my KFP SDK version locally because I just pip install KFP. I don't specify a version. I go to fix a bug in the pipeline. I recompile it. I run my pipeline again. Now I'm using a newer Kubeflow SDK version and KFP SDK version.
But this will be solved if we pin the version, right, in the compiler.
If we pin the version at the API server level.
Yeah, and the API server level, right?
Yes,
if we pin the version.
Correct.
So why we don't want to pin the version, then slowly upgrade it in a newer version of KFP release, right? Let's say
that
0.
would be the solution. Yes.
So I
For
guess
version management, yes.
What if
Do you
it's
see any
like,
problems? Yeah, good.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Andre. Go on.
No, I just want. Are there any problems you see with that approach to pin the version?
No, it's just a different solution than what's in the PR, though.
Yeah. We should adjust it, right, in the PR because
Yeah.
PR just installed the latest version, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm fine with pinning the version because again, this is alpha integration with KFP, and all the new features. I mean, not been there yet, and we can also upgrade the version when we go to the next version of the release of KFP, for example, right? So
yeah, exactly. That's the benefit of this then is that I run the pipeline again after I've upgraded KFP and the rest of Kubeflow, and now I have the SDK version that matches. And assuming there's no backwards incompatible changes.
So this might be a dumb question, but what if you're making a new feature available where everything's backwards compatible, but you cannot use this new functionality with older versions of the SDK? Does that make sense? Like it defaults to some like value for like historical runs or whatever. But does that technically, because like for example, when we added support for tolerations, if I recall correctly, that didn't involve a major bump. And like in the past, you weren't able to add tolerations using the KFP Kubernetes SDK. And now you can going forward. But if you're on an older version of the SDK, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it was that's because we didn't drop the unknown fields.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
So like I'm thinking about features like that, where like newer versions of the SDK will support net new functionality, but they'll still be backwards compatible with older versions of the backend, unless you use that specific feature.
Yeah. We don't have this guarantee in trainer, but I mean, at least before go to beta, which will be like around February timeframe. So I think, I mean, from my perspective, right now, pointing to the version, all the way to the patch version probably makes sense. And maybe like even to the next minor version, like what we discussed in the PR, like less than 0.3, because we're not going to introduce any breaking changes for the patch versions, certainly. I mean, and this won't break the existing pipelines, right? When people recompile, when people resubmit the pipelines, right?
Yeah.
Because they only install them up to minor version 0.2, basically, right? Version. Yeah, I think maybe, I mean, yeah. Any other objections or concerns with that approach?
Can we write it out somehow? I'm not sure if I
Yeah,
still
let
fully
me.
follow it, so I'll have to read it.
I will make a note in the PR for like when we're installing the Kubeflow SDK, what
I
we've
think
been
we
talking
should
right now.
pin the server SVK with the KFP server in general though.
Yeah, so if we do that, then I'd be comfortable with the Kubeflow SDK because then it's just before we do a Kubeflow platform release, we just make sure the versions are bumped of the SDK version that we install.
So just quick question for my understanding, like the version in the API server, like where it is managed in the KFP?
Like the version of the SDK or the version of the API server itself?
Like in the API server, when you say bump the version there, what exactly do you mean? Like
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what what I was saying was if so when you go to release Kubeflow platform, like you would release the Kubeflow SDK first, and then we would bump the minor version of the Kubeflow SDK that we would install at runtime, essentially. But that's what I was saying.
And because is it the version inside SDK/python/setup.py, or it's a different?
It would be different, yeah, because today
Okay.
we don't have such a concept, right? It's just whatever the pipeline was compiled with, that's the same version we install. And so we'd be adding new functionality where the version we install is not dependent on the SDK that compiled the pipeline, but the version running on the API, like the version corresponding with the API server that's deployed.
Could you please link this information to the PR as well, like where you bump this version? Just
We would have to
so
add the
It's definitely
ability to specify. Yeah, there's no place to specify this version today, so we would
okay.
have to add this capability where, okay, I mean, it would be a trivial change. We just specify the version that we're installing. The API server would read this somehow and install it rather than infer it from the pipeline. That does
Okay.
mean there's a, and how does that work? So like the launcher executes the Python code prior to running. So do we make the change to the SDK to remove those pip installs?
well, we don't have the solution here, but it's not as trivial as it sounds. Because it's none of the API server code is aware that the SDK is being installed or not. It's exactly as whoever's doing the screen share show.
Yeah, so this is the IR, right? And the IR takes this value from the local like developer's environment, depending on whatever version of KFP they have installed. And that makes its way ultimately to the compiled Argo workflow. So this is a different workflow, but you get the idea. We're going to have to refactor that. Probably would require refactoring the IR to not inject this, and also refactoring the compiler to inject it based on a value in a configuration map, probably like the install config or whatever. So it's a pretty significant refactor, and it's probably a condition for this other PR that kind of triggered this whole discussion. I realize we're at 2 o'clock, guys. I'm so sorry for going over. If anybody needs to drop, feel free. I think I might actually need to drop, but we have some pretty clear-cut action items here.
There's
and this is
also, just want to add, there's also consideration of pipelines that were compiled prior to this that have the pip install, which we would have to continue to respect.
good point. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a pretty big lift, and we have to, it could potentially be brittle, so we have to be careful in how we do it to maintain backwards compatibility.
Okay.
So I think the action items probably are like a kept on the pipeline side about how do we pin the version at the what's deployed of the SDKs and not what the pipeline was compiled with, and then a separate KEP about how we would migrate the KFP SDK into Kubeflow. I don't know who would own that KEP though, if that's a pipelines one or not.
Team collaboration.
Hopefully. Yeah. So I guess can we at this point to the PR first and discuss the next steps? And I understand like there are more complexity, definitely. Thanks for sharing this in terms of the compilation part. I think like we need to probably not right now, but talk about like what kind of short-term goal we can give to the user so they can start play with this, right? And then eventually you have a strategy long term, right? Yeah.
Well, I think the short term is that we document to just add packages to install entry in the DSL component decorator. It's not the solution we wanted, but it's kind of the easy workaround. But I also don't want to be writing these KEPs because I have a tendency to write a lot of KEPs. I'm tired of begging people to review them.
But your caps are so good, Matt.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, maybe also like Matt, it's maybe a good thing for us to maybe reiterate once we give a survey results, because if, for example, like many people want to have KFP integrations with with other Kubeflow components and projects, we kind of need to consider it. Because in any case, we need to do this work. The question on just of prioritization and other things, right, from your side, from our side, what we should do to give users some short-term value, maybe something we need to talk about. But I understand the complexity behind this is and other things, right? We're talking about.
Do we have documentation right now for Kubeflow SDK about like how it integrates with the components? At the very least, we can start documenting that they can include it using package installs, whatever the features that exist today. Again, I don't think the overhead here is
Yeah.
that big.
We don't have yet a website, and we're planning to have a website where we can have a section around integration with Kubeflow pipelines, right? And on the Kubeflow pipeline side, we can also do this, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think in terms of like immediately unblocking users and like clearing a path with the least amount of friction possible, this is definitely like the easiest path forward. And it is like practically speaking, it just means that they just have to add packages to install equals open bracket quote
Yeah.
cube quote close bracket. Like that's not like a crazy lift.
Well, the only confusing bit though is like you don't know like which version of Kubeflow SDK to install that aligns with like the Kubeflow platform that's installed. So we could maybe provide some hints there or like some documentation with version mapping, but imagine most users won't read the documentation for that.
Yeah, because like I think there are a lot of things we should definitely. I know we were time, sorry to keep you late, but I think like I think it's probably should be some sort of our responsibility to say what versions are kind of compatible with each other. And again, like similar to what pipelines components work stream going on, right? Like we want to kind of make sure when people use those components for training, for optimization, etc., they're kind of compatible with each other. And I understand we have these platform releases. We're planning to do much more frequent releases for SDK right now because there are a lot of development going on, right? And platform releases like much more complex because we need kind of distribution alignment. So these will be much, we're planning to have like monthly releases. We discussed it just before KubeCon, and I don't think we need to wait for the platform integration, but at the same time we need to work on how to make those versions compatible, right? With each other, right?
I think that like starting out, if just in general for Kubeflow SDK for each Kubeflow release, that there should be like a version matrix, and then we can also point users to that. Be like, hey, if you're installing this Kubeflow version of this platform, you should use this version of the Kubeflow SDK.
Yeah. And for now, we only maintain version of trainer and Katib because we're having the two integrations, right?
Yeah.
That's it. So
Yeah, I wonder if we
Honestly,
could have it in the KFP UI telling you which versions to use.
like it actually kind of feels to me, I would think we should start off with documentation and then work to make that simpler. That way, at least we have some framework. Like we know where the source of truths are, right? Like,
Yeah, we get a lot of support questions on this. Even within KFP, people are like, which version of the backend is compatible with which
yeah,
version of KFP
yeah,
SD and which version of KFP Kubernetes and server API. And it's like, I can see how it's confusing for end users.
yeah. We should end the call. It's
Okay,
been really
thanks.
overtime.
Thanks for reining us in. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. This is all recorded and will be on YouTube. And let's continue this conversation in Slack and the next community call. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you.